So we're going to move on to the New Jersey statewide freight plan update. I'm going to introduce our speakers first, and Sophia will manage the questions and answer portion once the presentations conclude. We have two speakers joining us today. We have Janice Marino Doyle. Janice has a unique perspective on the freight industry as her family owned and operated a trucking business, and she witnessed firsthand how to succeed in business every day. Since 2022, she has served as the lead for the Office of Freight Planning within the New Jersey Department of Transportation. Janice has spent her career within both the public and private sectors. Ms. Doyle possesses diverse experience in strategic planning, business development, productivity forecasting, and program development. Janice has held numerous positions within the New Jersey state government, including the Department of Treasury, Law and Public Safety, Motor Vehicle Commission, and New Jersey Commerce and Economic Growth Commission, as well as running a successful productivity and planning firm. Janice holds a Master's of Communication from the New School and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Accounting from Wagner College. Also joining us today is Steve Cheramonte. Steve is a Vice President and Transportation Planner with WSP, bringing more than 2 decades of experience at the intersection of freight and goods movement and local and regional planning. His work spans statewide freight planning, bicycle and pedestrian studies, traffic safety, congestion management, and multimodal corridor planning. He has played a key role in supporting major freight planning initiatives, including work with the New Jersey Department of Transportation's Office of Freight Planning, where he has developed advanced strategies to improve goods movement while integrating complete streets principles and community-focused solutions. So, Steve, I believe you're going to kick us off, correct?
I am. Thank you. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to this group, Sophia and Jacob, particularly, and NJTPA for giving us top billing at today's meeting. As sort of was hinted at, so we're going to provide an overview of our upcoming and an ongoing update to the statewide freight plan. Talking a lot about the process and the outcomes, but we're also focused on getting input from this group as we look to understand the priorities and the challenges from stakeholders and decision makers in the part of the state that has the most substantial freight activity. Next slide. So a quick agenda. I'm going to start off by handing it to Janice Marino Doyle from NJDOT. And she's going to provide an overview of the department's Office of Freight Planning, primarily what her group does to support federal and state transportation decision makers. We'll then talk about why we complete a freight plan. We'll provide some initial outcomes of our ongoing work, and then we'll talk through some next steps. I am pleased that we will also be joined by my colleague Stephanie Finch from WSP, as well as Neva Maniar from Janice's team at NJDOT, to help us talk through several of these elements. We do have several inputs for you all to provide input. We have, I believe, 7 questions that are scattered through the slide deck. We're going to be using Zoom's embedded polling as Sophia just deployed to find out who is in the room today, mainly to really obtain your feedback. This is a big part of why we're here today. So please provide your input and your thoughts, as they will absolutely play a role in how we will advance our plan. If you have questions, please place them in the chat as we move through the slides. We should have time to answer questions after we move through our deck. So with that, I'll hand off to Janice first to get us going.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. As Steve said, I'm going to give you a brief understanding of what the Office of Freight Planning does here at NJDOT. We were initially created to serve the states as the state's subject matter expert on unique transportation needs of the state's goods moving industry. The role was expanded after we completed our 2017 statewide freight plan, which Steve will briefly highlight in a few minutes. At this point, our group focused on the meeting, the time, and the expanded federal requirements for freight planning that were associated with the FAST Act. Beyond that, we expanded our reach to our group to focus on freight needs specifically in New Jersey, while expanding our visibility internally at NJDOT. Today, we are working on to expand the actions developed as part of our statewide freight plan, which is one of the reasons we're so excited to be here today. Hearing your priorities for freight will not only strengthen our outcomes, but help support the future needs in our communities. Next slide, please. Our primary focus historically has been to support the evolving freight planning requirements required by the State Department of Transportation. At the top of the list is the statewide freight plan that we're talking about today. But the team supports numerous other activities as well as we lead the Freight Advisory Committee, a group of agency and industry freight experts to discuss and understand the state, national, and global freight trends. We also support the National Highway Freight Program, which provides dedicated funding to invest in infrastructure projects that support the safe and efficient movement of goods. And we also frequently are asked to provide input on numerous federal requests, including several items shown here that are focused primarily on freight routes, freight supportive infrastructure, and how the state's freight transportation elements are performing. We developed and recently revised our state's critical urban and rural freight corridors, helping to ensure that many of New Jersey's highways are eligible for additional freight transportation funding. Finally, we support the three metropolitan planning organizations, including NJTPA, with data, subject matter experts, and other needs as they arise. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little feedback. Next slide, please. Okay, beyond those requirements, my office is usually very busy by many state-focused elements that in many cases were born out of the previous state freight planning. We discussed our freight management system in the past. This helps us to understand the most critical links in the freight in the state that supports and prioritizes future projects in our state highway network. We also created freight checklists to help my staff be better informed about freight activity along or in close proximity to specific corridors or intersections where projects are being implemented or considered. We manage the state truck map with frequently engaged about potential changes and to existing routes. And one of our most substantial functions of my group is the advancement of topical studies focused on specific freight challenges within the state. These include several studies that have been previously shared with this group, including our ongoing truck parking study that continues to move forward. Finally, we serve as the freight subject matter experts internally at NJDOT, responding to requests from other agency staff or county and municipal decision makers. With all of this, I'm happy now to hand back this to Steve, who's going to talk more about our freight plan and hear about your priorities for the future freight investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. So I have shared this slide a bunch during past discussions about our state freight plan, but it's a worthy refresher, and I think it's a good place to start because one of the first questions that I can remember being asked several iterations of the state freight plan ago was, well, why do we actually need a freight plan? And originally the answer was because we needed and wanted to understand how, where, and what goods move on our state's freight network. Ultimately, this is the blueprint for the state to prioritize infrastructure investments as well as policy initiatives. But all this changed when the FAST Act was passed in 2015, and this mandated that states had to complete a freight plan every 5 years. The threshold was actually lowered to 4 years by the IIJA in 2021, but a state has to have an active freight plan in order to receive its National Highway Freight Program funding allotment, which for New Jersey is about $38 million in 2026, and it's more than $400 million over the next 10 years. So a substantial amount of federal transportation funding. But what was really interesting was for those of us that were already working in freight in New Jersey when the FAST Act was passed, this was something that we were already doing. Next slide. So by the time that freight plans had become mandated, we had already completed in New Jersey 2 statewide freight plans. First, in 2007, we completed one of the first statewide freight plans in the country. It served several purposes. First, it was just a general primer on freight transportation. It also served as the first detailed review of numerous data sets that helped the state understand where freight investments or policy changes could be considered. We followed up the 2007 plan 4 years later with a highway-focused freight plan that really centered on the state's most critical freight corridors that were identified in that 2007 plan. And those are no surprise to this group. The 6 corridors that you see on the screen, the 78, 80, the Turnpike, 287, 295, and Route 17. These 6 corridors move substantial volumes of freight, and the 2011 plan took a much more granular look at the specific challenges with each of those highways, including things like pavement and bridge needs, as well as safety and congestion challenges. Next slide. So as I said, with the adoption of the FAST Act, we had to take a renewed look at our statewide multimodal freight network. And for the 2017 plan, that the act that was passed identified a series of initial requirements, but our focus again was really on how the state's freight infrastructure was performing, and also the identification of not only specific potential project locations, but those actionable outcomes that the Office of Freight Planning could carry forward. Those themes continued through to the state's current statewide freight plan, which was completed in 2023. This carried forward all of the requirements that were outlined in the FAST Act, but expanded them to include several additional elements. And I'll talk about those requirements in a moment. But like that 2017 plan, our current plan focuses on actionable elements, including infrastructure and policy guidance, but it took a bit more expanded focus on safety and multimodal freight opportunities. Next slide. So I touched on the fact that there were specific freight plan requirements that were outlined in the FAST Act and then updated in the IJ. And the update included 17 specific elements that a statewide freight plan has to meet. Collectively, they fall into the 6 categories that you see on the screen. For freight system and performance, these really highlight what's happening on the network today. These are freight flows by mode, current trends in the state and nationally, and all the policies and strategies that steer freight-focused investment in the state. For infrastructure and corridors, this is really all about where is that freight moving. This includes highlighting the state's critical and urban rural corridors, which Janice noted were recently updated by NJDOT. It also includes an understanding of where oversized or overweight vehicles are moving, as they have very specific needs and have a much higher impact on the state's infrastructure. Additional requirements include understanding the state's commercial port activity, as well as where military freight moves in and out and through the state. For mobility and congestion, this really highlights the challenges for freight in the state. This is understanding where is there friction in the state's network that slows the movement of goods. That's really an important element of the statewide freight plan. Additionally, it's about understanding truck parking challenges, which, as Janice noted, this is going to be well supported by work that is ongoing. It's through separate study, but has been documented previously with this group. For technology and operations, this is all about current innovations in freight, particularly those that are focused on efficiency or safety. For investment and governance, this is really the doing part of the plan. This is the part that focuses on existing priorities or projects. This is where we link the plan actions with the state and federal freight goals, as well as ensuring that we are consulting regularly with our freight advisory committee that meets 3 times annually. And then finally, for resilience and environmental impacts, these are the requirements that really help us understand how and where the existing network is potentially exposed to extreme weather or sea level rise. And this is also where we are able to take a look at air quality impacts, particularly those that are linked to bottlenecks or congestion. Next slide. All right, so here's where we're going to pause for the first time and look to this group for your input. This is intended to be a very broad, open-ended question, and it's worth noting you'll see a kind of a mix of open-ended questions as well as just typical sort of polling questions. For the open-ended questions, we will not be sharing the results live, but we will be summarizing the results with the group as a follow-up that traditionally goes out after the FIC meeting. So for this question, we're really asking for you to tell us what is your biggest concern related to freight transportation in New Jersey, in a sentence or less, which is a big ask. But we want to know what's keeping you up at night. What are the issues that you're hearing about from your staff, your constituents? What's your top challenge, and really why are you here today? So we'll pause for a moment, give you a chance to answer this question, and then we'll carry on with the slides. And Jacob, one question. I don't know if you're able to see how many people have responded or if you're not able to see that until you close the question.
So far 15 have responded.
Okay.
I feel like we
great.
should have some music playing, right, during this part?
A little Jeopardy music.
It gives me a chance to take a drink. That's okay.
Okay. Up to 21.
And I will say, if you feel like you weren't able to get your answer in time, you are welcome to share it offline or even in the chat, and we can add them to the poll answer when we close this out as well. But I think in the interest of time, so thank you for folks that have responded, and I think we can move on to the next slide. And Jacob, I don't know, can you leave it open until we get to the next question? That might be the easier way to do it.
It probably could have, except I just hit end, so.
That's fine. That's fine. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for the input. And again, we will have more questions as we continue through the slides. So one of the key drivers of any long-range transportation plan or any really long-range plan is the identification of those plan goals. These are the goals really govern the work that we're currently undertaking and are going to help guide the process as we move towards our final plan. And the goals that you see on the screen really build upon the goals that we've identified in previous plans. But to that end, freight and freight transportation are ever evolving. So we've reviewed several key elements, documents, policies to highlight, to really highlight the current practice shown through federal policies, neighboring and peer state freight plans, regional freight plans, as well as other plans completed in New Jersey, including the recently completed state long-range plan. Through this effort, we identified the 8 key freight goal areas shown here. I'm going to briefly summarize each, but please be mindful of these goals as I walk through them. As we are on the next slide, we are going to be asking you to identify your 3 priority goals as part of our next question. So first is safety, security, and system resilience. This is about truck and highway safety, rail or hazmat safety, infrastructure resilience, emergency preparedness, or climate adaptation. For infrastructure condition and state of good repair, this is really about maintenance, preservation, modernization of our infrastructure, including intermodal assets. For freight mobility, reliability, and operational efficiency, this is focused on reducing congestion, improving freight flows, resolving bottlenecks, or improving first and last mile performance. For multimodal connectivity and accessibility, this is about improved coordination amongst freight modes, expanding intermodal options, and promoting rural and urban connectivity. For technology, data, and innovation, this is about, as it says, using advanced technologies. It's about data-driven analytics, automation, demand management, or performance-based planning. For environmental stewardship, sustainability, and community impacts, this is about reducing impacts from freight emissions, managing stormwater and flooding, protecting wildlife, and also involves community health, thinking about freight as a good neighbor and minimizing impacts on communities. For economic competitiveness and freight system productivity, this is about industry-focused support, workforce access, or supply chain efficiency. And then finally, for collaboration, governance, funding, and program delivery, this is about promoting improved or expanded regional governance, including municipal and county stakeholders, private sector partners, MPOs, or neighboring states. This is also focused on fiscal responsibility and the promotion of alternative funding strategies. So thinking about those goals that I just talked about, we really want to understand the priorities of our key freight stakeholders. So thinking about the priorities that you just heard, please identify up to 3 that you feel should be the top priorities for the state of New Jersey. And Jacob, I'm looking at the question and it looks like we can only select 1. But that's okay. So we'll go with this. Pick your top because I'm not sure we can edit out on the fly. Pick your top priority for freight. How are we doing on responses, Jacob?
Up to 36, 37. Yeah, so much more. I guess it's easier to check off a box than to.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it looks like it's a couple more just came in.
Okay.
All right, up to 40.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we can close that one out.
I'm gonna hit end, and then Steve, can you see the results? I don't know if you want to say anything about it.
And looks like they're pretty well balanced with 4 of them far more popular than many of the others. But safety, security, system resilience, state of good repair, both things that we've heard a lot about in past discussions. And it's good to see the environmental stewardship, the community impact priority. That's one that has, I think, the state has taken a much bigger focus on over the last several years since our last freight plan. So glad to see that one is near the top of the list as well. So with that, I think we can move on to the next slide. And again, all of this is going to help support our outcomes as we advance our plan. So with that, I'm going to now hand off to my colleague, Stephanie Fish, who's going to talk a little bit about our initial outcomes from our economic analysis.
Thanks, Steve. Stephanie Finch with WSP's National Freight and Logistics team. Always happy to assist Janice and her team on their freight work. So I'm going to go through some high-level work we're doing right now on the state of the freight economy in New Jersey. This has been historically an incredibly important sector to New Jersey, employing, I believe, up to a third of the state's workforce and being a major component of GDP. So we're going to look at freight GDP using the data sources here on the slide from the BEA and the county business patterns. We look at freight employment, both from federal data and New Jersey state data. And then we look at the commodity flows from the Commodity Flow Survey and Freight Analysis Framework and USA Trade. So these sources help give us a picture of the industries, the employment, and the value of freight economy to New Jersey. Next slide, please. So first up, freight GDP. So that's New Jersey's portion of gross domestic product, where this graph here compares all industries. That's our orange trend line there with the dark blue bars. That's all industries in New Jersey. And then the lighter blue bars and the yellow trend line are freight supportive industries, which account for $200 billion in GDP. This has remained somewhat flat over the past 10 years or so, with New Jersey's overall economy, non-freight, growing a bit in proportion to the freight supportive industries. So we're looking at 2024 data. You'll see there on the very far bar where freight industries account for about 30% of New Jersey's GDP, which is very significant still. Next slide, please. So freight employment, as I mentioned just before, freight dependent employment in New Jersey accounts for nearly 1 in 3 jobs. So right in line with that GDP figure as well, at 1/3. And it has been more stable compared to other non-freight supportive industries, but some recent declines are mirroring a softening national market. So we're seeing a little bit of a decline in industrial warehouse development, which might not seem true in some areas in New Jersey. I know a lot has been built, but It actually is softening a bit from kind of like just post-pandemic highs. The interest rate situation where credit is tightening in the industrial markets have led to a little bit less building and a little bit of a pullback in certain industries, but still very stable. Next slide, please. So we have gone and used some of the data sources I mentioned above to look at where broad industry categories are located within the state. So first we can see manufacturing really clustered up in northern New Jersey in particular, and a little bit of a denser footprint. Retail, a little bit more widespread, also clustered in northern New Jersey with the population centers, but kind of broadly based. And then wholesale, which is really broad in New Jersey because with New Jersey serving as a little bit of the Northeast's warehouse system for goods coming in through the ports, there's a lot of wholesale activity going on. And I see a comment in the chat about how much pullback is due to AI on employment. It's a little hard to say. If you're interested in that kind of thing, there's a podcast run by the Moody's Analytics folks on current economic trends, and they follow things like the federal jobs numbers month to month. And so far, they're seeing what they think is a little bit of that, but more in the financialized sectors like insurance, finance, that kind of thing, and less so in warehouse automation or other freight industries at this point in time. But that's a really good question and something to keep an eye on. Next slide, please. All right, Steve, I'm going to turn it back to you here.
Yeah, and just building on that, Andrea and Stephanie, I think you hit on it. I think automation is probably more playing a much bigger part in the softening economy than at least in the freight industry than AI. But again, I think that it's ever evolving. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that or how the industry responds over the coming years. So thank you, Stephanie, for that. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes walking you through some initial highway analyses. A lot of this work is ongoing, but we did want to share some initial results, including some bottlenecks analysis that is directly associated with the cost of congestion scores for the state highway network. That's one of the primary focus areas. But we've also reviewed quite a bit of safety data as well. So I'll talk a little bit about crash incidents involving trucks, and then a couple slides on near-miss events, things like harsh braking, and the results of a new analysis that we're doing for the first time through this study. So next slide. So in order to understand how congestion can directly impact the goods movement industry, we've developed a metric to help us understand the cost of congestion associated with the state's bottlenecks. What this does is it takes into account the actual industry-borne costs, including wages, fuel, as well as the lost time associated with delayed deliveries. It's important here to note that we've set different thresholds for 4 distinct regions in the state. And you'll see this approach again in the crash analysis. But for congestion, each region has a different threshold to represent the most challenging bottlenecks in that region. So obviously the New York Gateway region in North Jersey, and those are the links that you see here in blue, this portion of the state has the most substantial congestion. That's no surprise to anyone in the room. But we also want to be able to highlight congested corridors in other parts of the state and not have the data completely skewed towards North Jersey. You can see here in the table the thresholds at which we consider a link to be a bottleneck. So for the New York Gateway region, that cost works out to just under $25,000 per mile per day. And that accounts for nearly 90 miles of roadway links that are classified as bottlenecks in the region. And I think my maps got overlapped on one another. But when you do zoom in, you can see here in North Jersey, this highlights some of those most critical corridors on the state network. Those are the ones that are in blue. Links like the New Jersey Turnpike. You can see portions of I-287 as well as Route 17 and Route 3, amongst others. These are all known key freight corridors for the state. Next slide. So we've also, as I said, we completed our initial review of truck crashes statewide. You can see on the left, this shows how crashes are dispersed by location and by roadway jurisdiction. For our analysis, we've looked at 4 years of crash data between 2022 and 2025. Overall, this amounts to nearly 1 million reported crashes, with a little more than 66,000 crashes involving trucks. As with the last plan, we've grouped crashes by region. Here you can see that more than half of all truck crashes are occurring in that New York Gateway area. And this is essentially the area between Bergen and Middlesex counties. You can see here in this zoom, you can see again that massive clustering, particularly along the turnpike. There are other large clusters throughout the state. One of the biggest clusters is actually in South Jersey at the interchange of 295 and 76 in Camden County. That's for those that know the area, that's the Missing Moves interchange project that has been under construction for several years, with the goal of solving that existing crash issue. But again, in the NJTPA region, you can see some of these many key crash clusters along the turnpike, as well as in the port area, and areas extending north towards Fort Lee near the foot of the George Washington Bridge. Next slide. But we also want to understand where crashes are happening off of the interstate network as well. Again, because many of or a large number of crashes are occurring on those interstates. So we want to be sure that we understand where crashes are happening on the remainder of the state highway network. You can still see a massive number of clusters that are present through North Jersey. And again, when we zoom in here on to the North Jersey area, you can see several clusters again in and around the port, as well as areas up north of Bayonne and into Jersey City, on Route 17 and on Route 3. Again, all known critical freight routes and clusters and areas in need of improvement. Next slide. Looking now specifically at truck crashes that resulted in fatalities, the map here shows that these crashes are generally spread throughout the state. But there are a couple interesting areas of focus that we've drawn from the data. And again, this is from our initial analysis. So we have not delved too deeply into it, but the intent is to make sure that we do, so that, again, those actions, those outcomes of the plan are set up to address or attempt to address some of these challenges. But you can see at the bottom that the number of truck crashes involving fatalities has declined and stayed relatively flat over the last couple of years. But one thing that really popped out is, and that's interesting to highlight, is that the number of fatal crashes on interstate routes has nearly doubled from 2023 to 2025, and that's that blue area in the representing the bottom of each of the bars. And you can see the number has gone from 20 to, I believe, 39 fatal crashes on truck crashes on interstates in those 2 years. So clearly something that needs to be considered as we move our plan forward. It's also worth highlighting the top graphic, the purple, that shows the time of day that fatal crashes involving trucks are most likely to occur. During the overnight period between midnight and 5 a.m. This period represents less than 7% of all truck crashes, but nearly 30% of fatal truck crashes occur in that overnight period. One of the, you can draw any number of inferences from this. Certainly, impaired driving is certainly a large part of crashes that are occurring in that period. But this does underscore one of the most significant needs in the state, and that's for truck parking. We know from our truck parking efforts that trucks parked in undesignated areas and overnight often result in increased truck crash incidents. So again, many things to unpack as we move forward with this analysis. For the last crash analysis, we've also reviewed truck crashes that involve a cyclist or a pedestrian. The map on the right highlights the fatal bicycle or pedestrian crashes involving a truck. And as you can see, they are, again, spread throughout the state. But one thing worth highlighting, at least at this initial point, is so truck crashes involving cyclists or pedestrians only account for less than 0.5% of all truck crashes. However, nearly 20% of fatal truck crashes involve a cyclist or a pedestrian. So we really need to be mindful of where those conflicts are most in need of improvement. So every time we go through this state freight plan process, one of the amazing things is, as a planner and somebody who's been in this industry for many years, is that we often find new data sets to help support our overall analysis. And for this cycle of the plan, we've been able to leverage telematics data to help us understand where trucks are frequently engaging in harsh driving events. Those include harsh braking, harsh acceleration, or harsh cornering. These data were originally developed for fleet managers to understand driver patterns, but we're now able to use them to understand locations where near misses may result in future crash clusters. Next slide. So we use a sample of this data. This is fairly recent data. It's from July and October of 2025, as well as January of this year. It provided us with nearly 12 million data points. The map that you see on the right highlights those top locations for each of, and when I say locations, they're clusters for each of the harsh driving event types. Some initial key takeaways from our review of the data. Not surprisingly, tight curves and turns are the locations that are most associated with harsh cornering clusters. But interesting thing from our standpoint is a lot of these may be indicative of either substandard design challenges or simply just a lack of advanced warning signage, things that can be addressed through fairly low-cost, short-term improvements. Underpasses, stop-controlled intersections are the most common locations associated with harsh acceleration or braking. I am going to highlight one of those locations in a minute, but often they're associated with sight distance or vertical constraints. And then additionally, what was interesting was of the top 10 locations that are associated with harsh acceleration, half of those are also top locations for harsh braking. So those should be considered priority locations for additional review. Next slide. So the location that we're going to talk about briefly is Style Street. This is in Linden, New Jersey. This is approaching the Northeast Corridor overpass. This location was ranked #1 in the state for harsh braking for trucks, and it was ranked #9 for harsh acceleration. Ironically, this is actually a location that we've looked at previously. This was part of the truck mobility study that we completed for Union County back in 2020. But you can see on the right, clearance signage is not bridge mounted. There is a clearance sign, but it's off to the side and a bit obscured. And what happens here is trucks are turning from Linden Avenue, and they're unaware of that impending potential vertical clearance issue. And this leads to trucks braking sharply before determining if they can pass under the rail bridge. Highlights a very, very clear issue that could potentially be invested or be addressed through smaller investments. These aren't major capital projects. This is signage or striping that, when deployed, can substantially reduce the potential for crashes. So again, there will be more to come out of this analysis, where we'll be able to prioritize potential locations for further study as actions from the plan. Next slide. Okay, so this again, this is our next question. This is again an open-ended question. You're going to see a few modal-specific questions for rail, maritime, and air freight over the next few slides. But here we're talking and thinking specifically about highway freight. We've talked a little bit about some challenging locations, some of the bottlenecks, the crash clusters, those harsh braking locations. But we want to hear from you. We want to know, what is that one location in the state that you travel through frequently, or that you have experienced or know of a freight-related transportation concern? It could be a corridor, it could be an intersection, it could be an interchange, a bridge. We want you to be as specific as possible. Eventually, what we're looking to do is take your input and pinpoint those locations on a map. So again, the more information that you can provide to us, the better. So we'll pause here and give folks a moment to highlight a concern.
I live at the governor's office, so it's international. I'm like, what's it?
Jacob, how are we doing on responses?
We're up to 11, 12.
Okay.
I think previous questions
one.
we've done like 2 minutes for each one, so we're almost at 2 minutes. So
okay.
I think that's up to 16 responses.
We'll give it another
10
couple of
seconds.
seconds. And again, if folks have a desire to add another location, they weren't able to answer the question, please feel free to copy it in the chat, and we'll make sure to highlight it. So I think Jacob, go ahead and close it. And again, thank you for the input. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about our multimodal efforts. This is going to talk about rail, maritime, and air freight. We're going to highlight some initial, very interim findings, and then again, ask you to provide your input on potential priorities for each. So first, I'm going to hand off to Nipa Maniar from NJDOT to talk about rail freight.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. I'm Nipa Maniar from New Jersey Department of Transportation, Office of Freight Planning. Now we are moving on to rail freight. We have not yet completed our analysis to report initial findings, but we do have several elements underway. Our focus for rail freight initially will be to understand where investments have been made since the completion of our last plan and review project locations that were identified previously. We are looking at existing rail activity through a review of the confidential waybill dataset, and additionally, we anticipate connecting with rail operators to understand their priorities that may be able to be included in the final plan. We will have more to report on this as we move through our work later this year. Next slide, please. So with that context in mind, we do want to hear from this group to understand your priorities for rail freight in New Jersey. Thinking about specific opportunities to improve conditions for state rail operators, please tell us what your top priority would be from these options, including other category. These options include 286K capacity for bridges, plate F clearance, route redundancy or capacity, grade crossing improvements, right-of-way preservation, yards or capacity, or other option that you may include here. Feel free to put your answers in the poll questions. And thank you for providing the input. How are we doing, Jacob?
Good. Up to 22. Give it another 10 seconds or so. All right. Can you see the results?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, so 286K capacity is pretty high. Route redundancy and capacity is the highest. So we appreciate your feedback. And now I will turn it over to Steve.
Actually, we're going to hand it off to Stephanie, and she's going to talk about maritime freight.
Thanks, Steve. So this is particularly relevant for northern New Jersey, but I also want to mention at the top that we do not forget about the maritime partners in southern New Jersey. But I'll just lead with, as many of you know from following the presentations at the FIC, the container growth at the Port of New York continues with 8.9 million TEUs in 2025, which is showing significant increases, particularly in exports, which were up 6.5% over 2024 and just under 2% over 2024 compared to 2025. Related to that, northern and central New Jersey industrial inventory, this is those warehouses that we all know and love. That growth was about 875 million square feet, which is intense. Truck remains the dominant distribution for these waterborne imports with strong intermodal rail connections. And it reflects a diverse cargo base with consumer goods, machinery, vehicles, and bulk commodities. And it's a major economic driver, as you all know, related to about 600,000 jobs and $18 billion in tax revenue. And I also want to highlight the Marine Highway Network development that both New Jersey DOT and New York City DOT have been pursuing, with New Jersey DOT really pushing for a more truck on barge or container on barge, larger amounts of goods, and New York City looking at more of a small cargo on bikes. But that collaboration between the two sides is going to be really important to get it up and running. So shout out to Genevieve, who I think is on the call, who's been really pushing a lot of that forward. And I'm going to move on to our question about maritime freight. What do you see as the main priority to support maritime freight in New Jersey? Number one, port infrastructure and capacity. 2, landside connectivity. 3, workforce development. 4, sustainability and decarbonization. 5, resilience and security. 6, funding and public-private partnerships. Or 7, other. I think we'll give that a couple minutes, or 1 minute maybe. Jacob, how are we looking?
Can you see the responses?
Again, so port infrastructure and capacity, more than or nearly half of folks felt that that should be the top priority for maritime freight. But landside connectivity, sustainability, decarbonization, both getting a lot of support as well. So again, this is really great input that when we go to start again thinking about the as I said, the doing part, to quote Genevieve appropriately. It's the input that we get from discussions like this that really helps drive that. So thank you again. Next slide, Jacob. All right, so the last of the 4 modes to talk through today is air cargo. This analysis is underway and mostly complete. We reviewed T100 cargo data that's from BTS and really helps us understand what are the primary markets that are served in New Jersey, both domestically and internationally, as well as the carriers that are serving those markets. Initial reviews of this data confirms once again nearly all air cargo in New Jersey moves in and out of Newark, but overall air cargo volumes are on the decline when compared to peer airports in the region and nationally. We are looking to connect with, or have already connected with, facility operators to understand their short and long-term priorities, including both on airport improvements as well as landside needs. This is primarily at Newark and at Atlantic City, but we also want to be sure we understand the potential for cargo growth at other airports in the state. And our last of the modal questions, as with our other questions for rail and for maritime, this is again thinking specifically about air cargo. We'd like to understand what you feel should be the top priority to support air freight in New Jersey, and fewer choices here. But first is airport facility upgrades at Newark. The second is expansion of air cargo at secondary airports. That would be airports other than Newark in New Jersey. third is intermodal connections. The fourth is security enhancements. And the fifth would be workforce development. And then again, if you have another idea that is not represented in those 5 categories, please use the other and share your thoughts as well. And I would expect maybe a few fewer responses to this one. Air cargo tends to be more of a niche market than highway or rail or even maritime. How are we doing, Jacob? All right. So looks like a few good answers here, but looks like expansion of air cargo at secondary airports and intermodal connections, the top 2 priorities. Again, the data historically, secondary airports tend to be, I don't want to say overlooked in New Jersey, but Newark, just given its setup, has often served, in terms of overall air cargo in the state, it's like 99.92% of all tonnage moves in and out of Newark. So very little moves at other airports, but again, always looking to find ways to grow that industry in the state. So we appreciate that input. Next slide. All right, so outreach is always a key element of any long-range plan, and it's why we're talking with this group today. But we also, for this statewide freight plan, we're really looking to expand our reach and hear and get as much input as we can. So to this end, we're looking to deploy a public survey that's going to be coming in the coming months, likely middle of the summer. And for this, we're really looking to understand how New Jersey's residents feel about freight. And it's certainly a topic that is well discussed and people have passionate feelings about. But we want to hear from the state's residents and hear what are their concern areas and where should the state focus its resources for potential improvements. So for this survey, we're going to need your help. Once that survey is deployed, we're going to look to groups like this and stakeholders to blanket the state. We're really looking to get this survey promoted as far and wide as we can with your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, in hopes that we can get as many people to respond as possible. So it's really just a teaser. Be on the lookout for that, and we'll certainly work through the FIC and NJTPA's broad outreach to be able to get word out on that survey. And we appreciate your support in getting that link out once it's ready to go. All right, so this is the last question and the last time we will ask for your input. We've talked a lot about individual modes. We've talked about specific locations where we want to hear about potential need for improvements. This last question really gets to how the state freight plan can directly support you as a public or private stakeholder. There's a lot of ways that the plan can accomplish this, but we want to understand your perspectives and get have a clear direction of where this plan should go. So it could be one of these, it could be all of these, it could be a handful of these. Again, we really want to hear from you. What can the plan do for you? Is it transportation improvements? Is it additional studies? Is it funding? Is it policy improvements? Is it more outreach? Is it subject matter expertise? Is there something else that maybe isn't represented in those 6 categories? Please share your thoughts. And again, this is really a very important piece that we want to understand as we work to finish our plan. Jake, it looks like we're doing pretty good on time. We're only like a couple minutes behind, so that's good. All right. So looking at the list of answers, I'll be curious to see. I can't see what the other answers are yet, but I will be very curious to see them once I get the final output from Jacob. But over 80% of folks said transportation improvements they want to shovel in the ground is certainly a big part of the state freight plan's investment plan is tangible projects, but also funding. Funding's key. New Jersey has several state mechanisms that can be used to support freight transportation projects, but that's always one of the big challenges is there's always going to be more projects than there is funding. But certainly being able to document that in the state freight plan helps give us the ability to ask for more and say that it's been documented by input that we got from the folks most impacted by freight in the state. So again, we appreciate your input. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. And actually, you can probably click through the next one, Jacob. All right, and again, as we wrap up, just with next steps, plan continues to move forward. We've got lots more analysis that yet to be completed. I mentioned the survey. Those two elements really gives you an idea of how we're going to link the quantitative piece of this plan, and that's the data and the analysis, with that qualitative piece, and that's the input that we get from forums like this, as well as the public survey. Once we have that very clear understanding of all of the most critical challenges that are facing New Jersey and in terms of freight, we'll be able to craft the actions that the Office of Freight Planning will then set out to accomplish over the next 4 years until we do this all over again in 2031. But we're also going to want to be sure that we have ways that we can measure our successes as we implement those actions. We're also going to draft our investment plan, and that really identifies, again, that's the blueprint that you heard me mention earlier. That identifies the projects that the state has already programmed, as well as future funding opportunities that are available for additional improvements. We are looking to have a draft plan complete in the late fall this year, with the final plan due to be approved by FHWA no later than June of 2027, which will be here far too quickly. Time just keeps flying. Next slide. And so with that, I'm going to pause. Here's our contact info, as well as Janice's. We are happy to answer questions today, but if you want to reach out with additional thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to email or call.
All right. Thank you very much, Janice, Steve, Stephanie, Nipa. Kind of looking at the chat box here. I don't see any questions there from anybody unless I'm missing something. I just had one question. So the state plan was just adopted, I guess, at the end of last year. Do you guys plug in to the state redevelopment plan in any way or manner?
So we do look at land use, but really at a state level. One of the challenges of a transportation focused plan, obviously land use certainly governs a lot of the transportation needs. But because land use is a locally controlled decision-making process, again, we're really looking to look at the state's transportation network at a large scale. And while we will identify locally specific transportation issues, touching on land use is not a requirement and not one that the state freight plan generally wades too deeply into. But we do want to understand, as Stephanie showed you some of those initial industry clustering maps. We do want to understand where growth is happening in the state. Certainly freight growth is visible. Anyone who travels the state sees that growth, with every passing day. But again, it's more focused on the economic development side and how that's linked to transportation needs.
Okay, thank you for that. Sophia's handling any other questions, but I see there's a question in the chat box.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat box from Kamal asking, how will the proposed Federal Transportation Act impact freight-related projects if approved?
I think the biggest changes are it's shifting funding, not necessarily dramatically, but and Stephanie, chime in because you certainly know more on this topic than I do. But it's largely shifting the focus back to highway, and I think it remains to be seen until the act is passed and how it changes between now and when it's actually implemented. Remains to be seen. Having been through this a bunch of times, I think it's a little scary doing a state plan in the midst of a transportation bill. But we've, in the past, we've been able to do it in a way that gives the state some flexibility when the federal bill is passed. So as of right now, I don't think it's going to have a massive impact. But again, it remains to be seen because there's a lot that's going to change between now and when that act is passed.
Yeah, it's a great question. And like Steve said, it's going to remain to be seen until the ink is dry. But right now, we're not seeing proposed changes to the National Highway Freight Program, which governs the funding that goes to New Jersey DOT once the plan is signed off on by Federal Highways. And in addition, we are seeing, like Steve said, a little bit of a pullback on the discretionary funding, especially for rail, transit, and resilience, bike ped, that kind of thing. But there is a big focus on funding for truck parking. And that is something that New Jersey DOT stands to be well positioned for with the truck parking work that it's doing right now, and examining this issue deeply and looking at areas where for potential project development.
Thanks, Stephanie. A question from Jacob, which I guess I'll read, is do you coordinate with adjacent states? I think everyone is on different schedule for their updates.
Yeah, and that's a good question. So we, the New York State and PennDOT, they both are members of our State Freight Advisory Committee, and we talk with them fairly regularly. In terms of coordinating the plan itself, at least in New Jersey, we provide each of those states the ability to have comments on our state plan. Again, that's through our Freight Advisory Committee. The PennDOT plan, I believe, they're due to be complete at the end of this year. And then New York's plan, I don't think it's even the re-up hasn't even started. They're off cycle a bit more. But we're certainly committed to being partners with each of those states. Particularly Pennsylvania and New York. Obviously, freight doesn't end at the Hudson or the Delaware, and there's mutual benefit to partnering with each of those states.
Thanks. Does anyone else on the call have a question?
Yeah, I don't.
Right.
Last call for questions from anybody on the call or any other committee members. I think we're clear on that. So once again, thank you all very much for a very interesting presentation and discussion.